Hello, everyone. Welcome back to REIMAGINE 2021 version 10. So this is our 10th edition anniversary. We've been doing virtual conference events for a whole year now. We've done over 500 interviews, and we really strive to bring you the latest news on founders, innovators, and just current news in our industry. There's tons of innovative and important people building out there. So we're excited to bring you new guests and returning guests. I'm Roshan Mirajkar. I'll be your host for this event, and I'm very excited to be joined here with a very important guest who's doing some important work. With me here today, I have Dave Jevans, who's the CEO at Ciphertrace. Dave, welcome to the REIMAGINE show. And why don't we, just to get started off with, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into the space, and also just how have the first 2 quarters of the year been for you and your team.
Roshan, it's great to be with you, and congratulations on the 10th episode of REIMAGINE. It's exciting to be with you. So my name's Dave Jevans. I'm CEO and founder on the founding team at Ciphertrace, and we're a company that provides regulatory compliance and controls for cryptocurrency companies, for financial institutions like banks to get into crypto, and for regulatory agencies as well. So my background is 20 years in computer security and cryptography. So I started out as a crypto geek, I guess, and eventually founded 3 other companies that are in the encryption space. A company called IronKey. You may know that there's a gentleman who's got $250 million of Bitcoin locked up on his IronKey. So we built that device. So trying to advise him about what he might want to do to unlock his Bitcoin. Long history in encryption and crypto. I'd say I really got interested in this stuff in about the year 2000. So I went to the Financial Cryptography Conference. I think it was the second one. They're always held on a different island, typically in the Caribbean. And I would encourage anyone who has a scholarly interest in cryptocurrencies to check out Financial Cryptography, FC, the conference. And hopefully we'll all be able to go there next year, post this pandemic thing. But I went there in 2000 and I got to meet some of the early innovators in cryptocurrencies before Bitcoin. So this was, 9 years before the Bitcoin paper, but, the zero knowledge guys, some of the folks out of DigiCash who had some of the seminal patents on digital currencies, Mondex team, which was MasterCard's early foray into digital currencies. I met the eGold team about 5 years before they unfortunately had some troubles with the law on money laundering, but that was a gold-backed digital currency. So I got really interested in it back then. I used to meet with Nick Szabo all the time. Actually, we worked together. So I was a big fan of his work on smart contracts. He and I worked together at one of my companies for a number of years, and also would have dinners trying to figure out how to build a cryptocurrency and how do you get money in and out of the system from fiat. So I have a lot of respect for Nick and the work he did in really inventing, in my opinion, the field of smart contracts, which we now see realized in Ethereum and Binance Smart Chain and other systems. So that's how I got into it. Eventually I decided that, this is going to be big. I got late into Bitcoin. I didn't start in Bitcoin until 2011. But I knew at that time, this is the one. And I saw this, this can be a big, huge global thing. And then 2015, after we'd done a number of these businesses, we realized that this compliance piece is going to be big. If it's going to go global, it's going to be regulated, unfortunately. And there needs to be tools to help people when they get their stuff stolen. If there's ransomware things, just compliance stuff. So that's why we started Ciphertrace.
That's an awesome story, and I love how you said you got into Bitcoin late in 2011. Although compared to most people, that's very, very early. But it's pretty interesting to hear you talk about even before just crypto, you were already interested in all these security frameworks and how important they were. So what can you tell me about from the past to where we are right now for something like institutions, what are the different security considerations that you have to tailor for them? And what do you think is kind of the future for things like custody of crypto?
So I think that for financial institutions, there's really two issues. One is, do you provide banking services to cryptocurrency companies? And the other one is, as you mentioned, how do I bring crypto to my customers, whether they're my only institution customers or my retail customers? So I think on banking crypto companies, anyone who's run an exchange will understand the difficulty in maintaining bank accounts that are active on a global basis. It's challenging. A lot of banks don't want to do it, but they obviously have become a lot more aware and are realizing they're missing out and that this is big. So one of the things that we do at Ciphertrace is help the banks gain a perspective on a prospective banking customer. So for example, we'll tell them things like, here's where they say they are. Here's where they really are registered and regulated. Here's what their know your customer procedures are, what their KYC is. Here's our hot wallets. And then also monitoring the blockchain and saying, okay, well, this is the percentage of transactions we see, which look super clean. Here's some dirty stuff that we can see. Maybe there's some money laundering going on. Maybe ransomware folks have accounts there and are collecting money and cashing out there. So we give them a perspective to look at a company to make sure that they feel comfortable in opening corporate bank accounts for those companies and providing access to the banking system for the exchanges. And we view that as an important thing to happen here, is that everyone in crypto who's running a cryptocurrency company or any kind of DeFi project needs to, at the end of the day, have access to the banking system to be able to get fiat money in and out for customers. And then I'd say the second one is on custody. Major banks are moving into this area. They're starting in it. So there's either providing banking services or providing native custody. There's several hundred that we know at Ciphertrace that are building out systems to provide custody services to their corporate customers or their high net worth individuals. Because it's great to buy a hardware Bitcoin wallet, but if you're going to put more than $10 million on it, you might. There's a lot of people who are thinking, there's a lot of issues around that. And maybe if I'm buying $100 million of Ethereum or Bitcoin or something else, maybe I want someone else to manage it for me. And so that's where these custody services come in. And then I think the next step we're starting to hear interest from banks saying, I want to go beyond that. And I want to give access to my customers to buy and sell crypto, but also at a retail level to access the safe DeFi projects.
Yeah, and I think that's another topic that I was going to ask you about, right? Like DeFi, the total value locked has been growing so much. And everyone always, says there's no bounds to DeFi and different things like that. However, I know recently the Financial Action Task Force updated their guidelines and sort of included DeFi in some of the applications that's responsible for things like AML and CTF standards. So what is your perspective on that? Is that good for the industry? And is that just going to be like a precedent for the future?
I think it's a fact for the industry. So regulators regulate. They're put in place for a reason, I suppose, which is has largely historically been protection of investors and to some extent on the AML side and counterterrorist side, protection of society from people who are sending money to folks who like to blow things up. Sure, there's a lot of political issues as well, but generally those things are in place for a reason. They're going to not ignore DeFi. That's just a fact. Whether it's good or whether it's bad is people's opinions, but that's just a fact. So you're going to see regulation in DeFi similar to what you've seen in other cryptocurrency markets and other stock trading market. So if you think about, the free market and trading of stocks, it's regulated in the United States by the SEC. If it's commodities, CFTC. If it's currency, Treasury, IRS obviously wants their take of everything. That's not going to be different in DeFi, in my opinion. It's just a fact, and it's going to be a fact globally. So how do we do it and facilitate it in the best way possible that preserves people's privacy? Where if there has to be an investigation, then it can be done. But other than that, you're not just harvesting people's data. There's a lot of challenges around identity in DeFi, and I think this is up to the industry to move forward quickly with proposals around how to do it, because I think if you layer down a lot of the old banking things about you have to identify your customer and KYC them this way and AML them that way and file SARS this way and all this other stuff, it's going to break DeFi. And we don't want to do that, because it's, I think, that one of the most innovative things we've seen in the last 10 years in financial services, and it has so much promise. So these are the areas that I think we need to focus on. Today, it's largely unregulated, but as you've seen from the FATF guidance, there's a lot of discussions around it at a global side of things. We're going to see with the new regime in the United States, they're going to have their own opinions on it. They need to be educated fast and hard by industry and industry groups. So Ciphertrace participates in a lot of those groups. And I would encourage other companies who have interest in this to get involved, get participating, and educate the lawmakers to help us make DeFi flourish and not crush it.
Definitely. And I think one of the issues is like there's no industry standard, so to speak, compared to like your standard precautions for things like cybersecurity or really any other industry. There's kind of like a mix up of different industries. So I know you guys are one of the applied intelligence partners with BAA Systems as well for cryptocurrency intelligence solutions. So can you kind of talk about like what are some things you guys look at in terms of your role and establishing some of these standards? Are you guys kind of making them? Are you guys the ones making it as you go, or are you guys following something?
So we're trying to help in a number of ways. So at Ciphertrace, we participated on travel rule standards, so we can talk about that later in our conversation. But what we did on there was create a nonprofit organization and enrolled over 150 other people from different crypto companies, projects, and regulators to build open standards. We've also been endorsing other open standards for movement of data and protection of information related to this compliance stuff. So yes, we participate in standards and we help build them where they don't exist and make all of it open sourced. I'd say on the DeFi side of things, one thing that we did was we put out a compliance oracle, Ciphertrace DeFi Comply, about 2 months ago, that allows DeFi projects to connect into this oracle. And it's fairly basic right now, but it does sanction screening. And this is important because even though DeFi projects right now have a little, depending which country you're in, have a little bit of a gray area on, do you have to do AML or not? Do you have to do KYC or not? Because if you don't take custody of the funds, maybe you don't have to. This is this gray area. But I can tell you this, if you facilitate the movement of funds or virtual assets to sanctioned entities, whether they're known terrorists or known criminal organizations, you will have liability today. So we figured, let's just give the basic thing to the world. And then as the rules change, and as it becomes more clear on regulation, we'll provide solutions for everybody in DeFi to do their compliance. But I think it's nice to start with something simple, which is keep people out of jail and let them keep building.
Yeah, definitely. As I understand, there's kind of different levels to, what you're saying, whether you're actually transmitting money or doing the settlement and different things like that. So talk to me a little bit more about this travel rule. I don't think a lot of people actually know what it is. What are some of the immediate implications that you think are going to be in effect? Like is it going to affect more retail users or institutions?
It's all going to affect institutions, meaning anybody who's a business that engages in cryptocurrencies will be affected by the travel. Well, they already are in the United States. They are in a number of different countries. They will be in most of Europe shortly. They already are in Japan. They are in Singapore, Switzerland, but you'll see it in the UK and throughout Europe. Travel rule basically is trying to turn cryptocurrency exchanges and other business entities into money service businesses, or making them look like banks, which is that when funds are sent from one of these businesses to another. So let's say I have an account at crypto exchange A, and I want to send money to you, Roshan, and you have an account at crypto exchange B. Today, I just do that. You tell me your Bitcoin address, let's say, and I send it to you, and it's fine, right? Travel rule says that those VASPs, virtual asset service providers, those exchanges, will have to send my name, first name, last name, and my account information with that transaction, and your name too, so that both sides of the exchanges can check those names against terrorist lists, other sanctions lists. And that if there was an investigation, because, maybe, I don't know, I'm laundering stolen funds and sending it to you, for example, they would be able to find out where I sent it, and, through appropriate court orders and things of that nature for investigation. So that's what travel rule is. It's basically the same way when you wire funds from one bank to another, you have to put in the account number and the name of the person you're sending it to, plus your name and your account number, and that gets transmitted along with the money. That's what the travel rule is. Now, I think everybody who's watching this can appreciate that that's actually more difficult than you think, because it can't be native to blockchains. There's so many chains. We don't want that stuff sitting on public chains. So it cannot be transmitted over blockchains. You're not going to go modify Ethereum or Bitcoin or Tron or anything else. It has to be done out of band. So then that gets down to interesting challenges about how do I know who controls which account number, or on which chain, which address, where do I send it to, how do I do it securely, how do I ensure end-to-end encryption and make sure that it really is exchange A and it really is exchange B, and where are they and all that. So there's a ton of data protection issues and security issues that come along with the travel rule issue.
Thanks for the explanation, because I think everyone's kind of confused out there. But a lot of those things actually sounds tricky to actually impose, or maybe they can just do the detection, but I don't know about the enforcement. So that's one of my questions. Like, how far are we from using a lot of the information on the blockchain, and where the government can, or other entities can actually do the enforcement? And like, do you have any interesting stories of maybe you've been part of some of that enforcement?
So I think enforcement is, at the end of the day, the issue here. We don't need more rules. We don't need more regulation. Leave us alone, in my opinion. There's enough stuff out there. What I think is the real issue here is enforcement is not being done uniformly around the world. When you think about travel rule or any other regulation, that's done by the countries themselves. So if United States, who has a travel rule requirement, has had one, by the way, on crypto for more than 5 years, but hasn't enforced it, I mean, one day they will. They haven't yet, but that's because they know that there's not, that solutions are emerging. So Ciphertrace has a solution, but we also sit on the board of TRISA, the Travel Rule Information Sharing Alliance. We work closely with OpenVASP and InterVASP and US Travel Working Group to some extent, and a number of other working groups around the world, TRP, Europe. So there's the standards are still evolving. So that's why the US government hasn't come down and said, okay, if you're in the US and you want to send money outside of the US via crypto as a company, not as an individual, they haven't done any enforcement yet, but that's going to change over the next year or so. Singapore is much more strict about that. They're like, if you want to set up an exchange in Singapore, you have to get a license to do it. I mean, here you still have to. In the United States, you have to register with FinCEN, but in Singapore, you have to get a license, and that you have to have travel rule compliance. So you're going to see that around the world. But enforcement, I think, is the challenge. So at Ciphertrace, we did a survey of over 800 cryptocurrency exchanges in 80 countries, and we found that more than half of them have either really crappy or non-existent KYC, like they don't check who you are, even though they might be required to in the country that they're in. So no one's enforcing it. So what this means is that the bad guys move their operations to those exchanges. And this is where you see, the bad guys being like the guys who are doing the ransomware stuff. They got to cash it out somewhere. They'll go to an exchange where no one's enforcing the regulations, even though they may exist. You'll see people who are stealing funds, right? So anyone who's hacking into exchanges, people who are finding vulnerabilities in DeFi contracts and stealing funds out of DeFi contracts, people who are doing rug pulls in DeFi or exit scams in an exchange. They're moving a lot of that money out to these unregulated exchanges, or the ones that have no enforcement. So I think, like I say, I don't think we need more regulations. It just needs to get better enforced and coordinated around the world so that if people do get ripped off, there's a way better chance of getting their money back.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I didn't even know that, the rule like that in the US existed, but yeah, totally. Enforcement is a totally different thing. And, going back to like institutions, everyone knows that, these companies like MasterCard, other banks, they spend millions every year, like using things like AI and machine learning to, fight fraud, spot patterns, different things like that. So do you think in the future, these companies like Square and others, like they're rolling out their own services? But my question is, would they come to someone like you who has kind of like a SME in the crypto area specifically for this? Because like, what are some of the important, knowledge or skills do you think is required for the work that you guys do? Like what are unique things to our industry only?
Companies like you mentioned, payment processors who are involved in crypto, like Square and PayPal and Visa and MasterCard and these other folks, they all purchase services from Ciphertrace or our competitors. They can't build it themselves. There is so much investment that has been put into the technologies that we've built around managing, 800 tokens across many, many different blockchains, being able to do the identification of the criminal activity, being able to provide visualization tools for investigators, simple risk management scoring, fraud prevention, ransomware detection, malware detection related to crypto, smart contract stuff, chain hopping, all of that. I mean, the R&D that has been built by companies like Ciphertrace and others, I mean, there's probably been, I'd say, $500 million invested in that so far. So probably 500 million in R&D has been invested in that, and it's not stopping anytime soon because the business continues to get more and more complex. So yeah, there's a big market for these technologies, and our view is obviously we want to be the biggest player in the market or one of the biggest players. We are one of the biggest right now, as you know. But we do have these other missions. We believe in open standards so that if you do want to build it yourself, you can. And we also believe a lot in user privacy. So we, for example, are presenting to FinCEN in the next couple of weeks about how do you do travel rule with privacy preserving technologies? How do you use zero knowledge systems to do sanction screening and things of that nature? What does self-sovereign identity mean as we think about DeFi and the need to identify, for example, who's using these systems in case something goes wrong, but otherwise keep everyone's information private. And where does that come from without centralized identity providers? So those are some of the missions that Ciphertrace and our founders and our executives and our employees take forward, not just like, hey, we're gonna provide these AML, KYC compliance tools.
I think that's super important. And, if they're going to roll out these regulations anyway, then I think it's great that someone like you and your team are there for the educational aspect and also the implementation. Because, who knows if they try to do it themselves, it would take them much longer. So I'd rather
they'll never do it. Yeah, I mean, they'll never do it. Like, our experience is just working with a number of the big banks. For example, they invest, they build, they do things, they get a result, but they'll miss 80–90% of the bad stuff, and they'll have false positives like crazy, meaning they'll identify good cryptocurrency transactions as bad. And then that causes pain for the customer, and it causes pain for their internal compliance staff. So you've got to evolve this to a much higher level of technology. And that's why, partnerships that Ciphertrace has with companies like BAE Systems, as you mentioned, Nice Actimize, and a number of others, Feature Space, and a number of other of these technology companies, they have embedded roots in the financial infrastructure for fraud detection, anti-money laundering controls, detecting terrorist financing. We've integrated with a number of these top players, and we're very proud to be working with these companies. And by putting these things together, you get the benefit of advanced AI, machine learning, also workflow, case management across all of these systems, and integrating crypto in. And it just makes crypto bigger. It means that hundreds of millions of more people can have access to the system in a safer way, and that we can continue to grow this thing.
Yeah, those are all I think really positive ideas, right? There's, I think, almost 90 billion in total value locked in DeFi right now, but there's trillions in other assets. So there's a lot of upward potential. And congrats to you guys for recently raising your Series B, I think $27 million Series B. So can you tell me, like, internally, what do you plan on doing with some of those funds? For you all, is it more about expanding your headcount, hiring more analysts, or are you looking to expand to more features, and is that more important, you think?
So we do have a strong analyst team, and they do a lot of work around, okay, that's criminal activity and these kind of marketplaces that buy and sell stolen credit cards or other illicit things. This is terrorist stuff. This is ransomware, all that. A little bit of that for sure. Technology development, absolutely. As I mentioned, we launched our first DeFi compliance product, but there's a lot more work to be done in this area. Also global expansion. So, we see certain markets where there's just going to be a ton of growth there. So supporting customers around the world. And then we do, as I said, we do work on some nonprofit projects as well. So we work on the Travel Information Sharing Alliance, trissa.io, and helping get all of that going around, effectively open source standards of behavior. How do you identify cryptocurrency exchanges and VASPs around the world? Educational efforts, conferences, and things that we run around the world, either virtually or they used to be in person. But we want to continue to grow that as well.
Yeah, those are all very important things. And a little more about just your product itself. Like, how many different blockchains do you guys support, and what can you personally tell us, like, working or analyzing these different blockchains? Is there any one that's more difficult than the other, or is it all the same to you guys?
No, they're not all the same. So we support many tens of blockchains. We support the biggest blockchains out there. We continue to add new ones. And then on top of that, there's the currencies and tokens themselves. So we support over 800 of them right now, and then and tens of blockchains. Are some more difficult than others? Yeah, things that aren't open source are difficult because we want to work with the developer. Fortunately, most are open source, and also most developer communities are interested in having support on the compliance side, because they know that if they don't, then a lot of exchanges and other folks can't use it or won't use it or will deplatform it. So we got a lot of help from the community. It's fantastic. I'd say the most challenging one for us has been Monero. And so we've been working on Monero now for 2.5 years. We've made quite a lot of progress in that. But it's a moving target, I mean, there's a lot of incredibly intelligent people working on the Monero project, and my hat is off to those people. They're doing amazing work there. But we've made quite a bit of progress on Monero. That's so far, that's been the most difficult one.
Yeah, definitely. And things like Bitcoin, they don't have state. Things like Ethereum, you have a lot more data. So that definitely makes sense. One of my last questions, kind of forward reaching, but for the future of when people are launching things like CBDCs, how do you think having a lot of that information publicly out there, because let's say it is a public blockchain, what do you think will be different in terms of maybe the power struggles, or will it just be a more efficient world?
You mean particularly for CBDCs?
Yeah, if you could just trace everything, and even for companies, you can see commerce. How do you think that will change what's important to companies or countries?
So I'd like to talk about that, and then I also want to just finish up on some thoughts around DeFi and things, because a lot of people don't seem to understand it and why it's important. Well, let's just talk about CBDCs. You're assuming in your question that they're going to be on blockchains. Yes. That is not the default government mentality. I have dealt with government agencies all around the world and central banks. I can tell you there's a lot of people who think that they're going to run a centralized database at a central bank to run CBDCs, that they have nothing to do with blockchains, that they will be centrally operated. China, is obviously, they have a dual reason, right? They want currency control. They want to try to take away the US dollar as the petrodollar. And there's a lot of, currency wars that's real, that's happening. But they also want to track all their population. Or at least that's what it appears from the outside of by having a centralized system operated by one government agency. When people come to Ciphertrace for consultation on government central banks on this, what I advocate is it should be more of a blockchain-based technology. It needs to be co-operated with the major commercial banks in your country. So bring the banks in so that they're all operating part of this chain themselves. And then this does several things. One, it makes a system far more secure. If we have a central bank running a big database tracking everyone's stuff, I don't think any of us want it. But secondarily, it's the target for every nation state and every hacker in the world to go in and attack it, get the data, or pay someone who works there, $5-10 million a year to infiltrate it and get all the data out or modify it or something like that, right? So you want to make it a blockchain-based system, a DLT at least, so that central banks are involved in it, because it's much more secure. In that case, you have to go hack half or more of the banks. Secondarily, right? So that's security controls. Secondarily, who's going to issue the credentials to people to access CBDCs? Well, it's not going to be central banks. I mean, I don't know my central banker. I mean, I know them, but you know what I mean? You don't know them probably, and most of our listeners don't. But I know my banker down the street or at my local branch. So they're the people who are going to issue, whether it's a digital wallet on your phone or a card that you can use at a credit and debit card reader. So you want to enroll them for those dual reasons. They have the customer relationship. They can bring the unbanked in. They can bring the banked in. And there's the security issue. And then there's also the privacy issue too, right? Because then they'll know who their customers are, which they do today, right? Your credit card issuer knows every single thing you buy. But the world doesn't. And this is the same thing here. You could still see transactions, and it could be a a ledger that other people can read. But the only people who'll be able to de-anonymize it and know who's who is the issuers of the identity and the credential, and that requires court orders and due process and investigation and all that other stuff, subpoenas. So this is when I talk to central bankers, this is how I feel like they should be thinking. And but I can tell you there are other vendors out there that come from legacy banking that have been providing banking security products and banking transaction products for 20, 30, 40, 50, 80, 100 years, who are thinking about it much more in a centralized fashion and are saying, hey, central bank, buy this giant database from us and we'll run your CBDC for you. So obviously that's not the way forward. And one of our educational things is how do we educate central bankers about this topic?
I see. So what they're trying to build I can see how it might be a bit different goals. It might not be a completely native public blockchain. You could have private blockchains. But yeah, kind of going back to DeFi, like one of my questions I had was, in the traditional world, you have things like FDIC insurance, and then in things like DeFi, you don't really have any of that, but sometimes you have a lot of on-chain assurance, right? Like it won't get liquidated, or as long as your collateral is safe. So do you think in the future, like what would you tell the people that are maybe don't trust DeFi as much? Do you think we need a FDIC insurance type of product where it's like government or backed by regulation, or will the technology sort of triumph in the end?
You need insurance products. I'm not saying it has to be a government controlled entity like FDIC. You need insurance products, you need auditability, you need ratings agencies in the same way that we have ratings agencies on stocks and bonds, and we have rating agencies on credit. All of us have a rating, right? We've all got a credit rating through the various credit rating agencies. DNB rates the credit of companies. Moody's and others rate the credit of stocks and of bonds. There's all kinds of things that also all has to happen. There has to be insurance. It doesn't necessarily have to be government insured. But I think this is why some of the more forward-thinking financial institutions are saying, I want to be able to provide safe access to DeFi, which would be, how do you analyze a product, a project, to ensure that it's relatively safe? Because let's face it, there's attackers, there's scammers, there's bugs in code. All of these things happen. It's going to keep happening. And unless you are very astute at reading code and also debugging code and looking at the interactions, because DeFi is very complicated, right? Like there's very few things that are just one contract. Contracts call other contracts at other places, and oracles over here, and all this other stuff's going on. When you start to trace how like DeFi actually works, which is what we do at Ciphertrace, like it blows your mind how incredibly complex these are, and we're just starting. So yes, all of that will evolve, and then you'll have ratings around these DeFi projects where you can say, look, if I lose my money, I'm insured up to this rate, or someone's done a security audit of this thing and it's audited every 3 months or every release, or et cetera, right? Again, that doesn't necessarily have to be government. It can be private industry doing it, and it probably will evolve that way, and there'll be a thriving market for that. And this will set apart DeFi projects that actually have done a proper job of security, compliance, and have the reserves in case something goes wrong, from those that don't. And I'd also like to just say on the DeFi thing why I'm a big fan of it. And I saw an article today in the Financial Times, which was about Man Group. It's a big hedge fund type of thing. And CEO was saying, we trade crypto because we can make money because there's a lot of volatility, but it has no net value. It's just the tulip bubble. My view on this is that person does not understand DeFi at all. Because DeFi is all about taking those middlemen financial institutions away, but more importantly, It creates auditability and transparency because they're on blockchains, which means we can figure out what's actually happening with our money. We can all get access to way better products without, we call up our broker or say, I want this derivatives contract. You have no idea what they're actually doing. DeFi transforms the world in this way. And there's billions of dollars being invested in these projects by very smart people. And it's just interesting to see some of these, folks who say crypto has no value other than trading. They just don't get it.
No, that's 100%. That's a great point. Like auditability is already built in, and on top of that, people are trying to add things like governance and it all together. So yeah, and I wonder if you have any thoughts there as well. Like with a lot of these DeFi protocols, governance is popular. So do you think like long term, just talking about open source technologies and different things like that, like the collective people, like a large group of people will do a better job at maybe even securing a protocol? Or do you think, again, like all DeFi protocols should have a minimum standard of you've passed this audit or something like that?
Large groups of people have historically proven to be better at finding security vulnerabilities in cryptographic protocols. So when we think about, I've spent a lot of time in cryptography, as you know. I've got 20 years background in cryptography and then applying it here in applied cryptography, which is cryptocurrencies. My golden rule is don't invent your own crypto because you're going to get it wrong. I mean, just don't. And it's almost always been proven to be true. And I think every professional cryptographer would say the same thing. What you have to do is put these things through peer reviews, open reviews, testing cycles, have the open community look at them, attack them, understand how everything works. That's the only way to make robust systems that rely on cryptography, is to have lots of people look at them in a very transparent fashion and beat them up and find other problems and all that. So yes, I think the broader community can be much more effective than having a checklist of, you did A, B, C. Now you can still have an A, B, C checklist, particularly if you're trying to get an insurance policy against a thing or something like that. Sure, there could be baseline standards, but with the pace of innovation and what's being done here, yeah, having an educated community is important as well. But, vetting that community matters too, because I mean, if it's just a vote, like I know nothing about it, I just voted it's secure, that's not good either, right? So you do need to have a way to vet people who really understand cryptography, protocol design, to weigh in on it. So I think it's a combination. I would say also, in my experience, doesn't mean it's true all the time, but to get a lot of people coordinated around governance issues and things of that nature, generally very difficult to be successful. Typically, these things tend to be more CeFi than DeFi. So they're more centralized often than you think. That, there's really 4 or 5 people who do most of the work, who do most of the coordination, and then maybe there's a layer of 20 that are doing it, and then you can say there's hundreds, but successful projects are always driven by smaller teams that maybe have a layer of a bigger team. Anyone who's done open source development will know that.
100%. And I think this positive sentiment is a great way to end things off. And yeah, one of my last questions is, I know we had you as, involved in our Coins podcast production. So yeah, if you want to talk a little bit about how your experience was with that, that'd be great.
Absolutely fantastic. I think you guys do a great job organizing everything. The interviews and the dialogue is fantastic. I've had nothing but great experiences.
Awesome. Yeah, we're excited that you were a part of it, a part of that story, and part of the REIMAGINE story as well. So yeah, lastly, if you want to shout out, like, how can people get in touch with you, your team, or any websites you recommend them visiting?
Sure. I mean, all I can recommend, go to ciphertrace.com, check it out. I'd also say, if you have interest in evolving regulatory things, visit trsa.io, trsa.io. So that is this open source development and open governance model development for how we're going to implement these regulations globally. And there's meetings twice a week. There's a technical meeting, and there's also more of a coordination meeting. And sometimes we'll get regulators from different countries to come on, maybe once or twice a month, to come and talk. And you can have an open dialogue with many of the top cryptocurrency exchanges, technical developers, projects in the area of building open protocols for compliance that will work globally. And, you know, we've also, as I mentioned, we've been with that Trissa group, we've been working on ways to use privacy enhancing technologies to protect people's privacy rather than spraying people's names and addresses and account numbers all over the world, which is often how people are trying to do this. We really believe, let's use the cryptography that we have today to really solve that. So come and join the conversation at Trissa.io.
Yeah, awesome. And, you know, thank you all for doing the important work you guys are doing. Dave, it was a pleasure speaking with you here today. Look forward to speaking to you again in a few months, hopefully.
Roshan, it's always great to talk to you.
For sure. And I'll let you all tune back in to Reimagine 2021. We have countless more interviews. And if you want to check out our full library, you know, go to Reimagine 2021 on our YouTube channel. We have over 500 interviews. And yeah, I look forward to the rest of the event. I'll let you all tune back in. Thank you.